Remember when not even 2 years ago, Zion Williamson was absolutely everywhere? You couldn't go anywhere without seeing Bleacher Report or ESPN talk about what this guy's having for lunch. And now, after another dominant season by Zion, he's fallen off the planet with nobody talking about him. Why is this? When is the last time that you've heard someone talk about Zion Williamson and he's getting the exact same amount of hype that someone like LaMelo Ball is getting? Now, LaMelo is completely deserving of all the hype that he has gotten, but why isn't Zion getting his fair share of the pie? What if I told you that Zion was on a historic pace this year and playing at a level that we have seldom seen few players do before? Today, we are going to talk about how Zion Williamson has somehow become one of the least hyped players in the league, how he's on pace to be a top 20 player, and why next season Zion is going to be an even better player than he was from the year before. As we all know, Zion Williamson is just one of the most hyped NBA players ever, especially growing up in the age of social media basketball, where places like Ball is Life is able to just broadcast out high school highlights to millions of people. We are seeing players become superstars overnight, but of course for Zion, this hype is pretty well deserved. Just look back at some of his high school highlights. The man was an absolute beast amongst boys. And of course, this hype train just kept going where he went on to accept a scholarship from Duke. At Duke, Zion averaged 23 points and 8 rebounds per game with a crazy 68% field goal percentage, giving him just one of the best college seasons ever. So of course the New Orleans Pelicans took him with the number 1 pick of the 2019 NBA draft. And while he did miss a little bit of his rookie year due to both COVID and an injury, when he did step onto the court, things went ballistic.
Overall, Tim Conley. And what about that block? Zion from the weak side. Hey. That'll get them up on their feet. Hey.
Zion hype was at an all-time high, and of course, ESPN, Bleacher Report, and social media were eating it up. But nowadays, we are far from that. Because of course, the NBA has found its new poster boy in LaMelo Ball, and next season, LaMelo Ball might even get replaced by someone like Cade Cunningham. So anyways, the hype around Zion has fallen. How many posts of Zion are you seeing compared to someone like LaMelo or Giannis or LeBron? Not saying that those guys don't deserve the fame that they're getting, but what about Zion? So all the love for those other guys, that is completely warranted, but what about Zion Williamson? Well, my friend, I'm glad you asked that, because let's talk about what Zion Williamson did this year. In only his second season at 20 years old, Zion Williamson averaged 27 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists with a 65% true shooting percentage. Only 14 other NBA players have ever been able to do this before the age of 25. And out of all those 14 players, Zion had the highest true shooting percentage out of any of those legends. And yes, I know this is kind of a very ESPN-like stat. After all, this is a very specific assist, rebound, and scoring amount. But still, with those guys mentioned, all of them at one point were top 10 NBA players, and Zion's averaging the exact same stats as them. And even out of everyone in this group, they were still 22, 23, 24, even 25. The only players at the age of 20 to average 27, 7, and 4 is LeBron James, Luka Doncic, and Zion. So how was Zion this year? Well, he was 8th in the league in points per game, scoring 27 points per game. He was towards the top 15 of all players in the league, averaging just about 2.5 offensive rebounds per game, which is kind of crazy given that Zion is only 6'6". Most other guys on this list are standing 7 feet tall. His true shooting percentage was in the top 15, but if we look at the true shooting percentage of players scoring 20 points or more per game, he was 3rd best in the league when it came to that. And then Zion's 8.8 win shares was still towards the top of the league this year, and it was actually the 2nd most of all time for a player under 20 years old. The only other player to do that is Luka Doncic of last season. And finally, one more impressive stat is Zion Williamson had a PER of 27.1. This puts him 4th in the league, only short of guys like Nikola Jokic and Giannis Antetokounmpo. But he had a higher PER than Steph Curry, James Harden, and Kawhi Leonard. Once again, one of the highest PERs of someone under 23 of all time. If you compare him to other legends, he is on the same pace and playing just like a young LeBron, a young Magic, or a young Shaquille O'Neal. So all those stats look pretty good, but what about Zion on the court? This season, Zion was more efficient from under the hoop, from within the paint, from the free throw line, and from mid-range. The only place where he didn't see an improvement would have been from the three-point line, where last season it was higher, but he also had a lot less attempts last year than he did this year. This season, Zion Williamson also added a full rebound per game, and arguably, more importantly, Zion started averaging another assist and a half per game without averaging any more turnovers. We live in an era where there's obviously a lot of spacing, and your big driving guy, their job is to drive to the hoop, and if they can't get in the hoop, they kick it out. We see guys like LeBron and Giannis do this on a nightly basis. This is a skill that Zion has been improving on from game to game, and this is something that I think is going to separate him from just any other player in the league, and this is something that's going to make him a top 5 player in the league. By being able to drive towards the hoop, we all know how dominant of a player Zion is when going to the hoop. I mean, this is a guy who can overpower Rudy Gobert if he chooses to. But even if Zion can't get to the hoop, if he's able to kick it out to another guy who's able to open up the shot, this opens up worlds for the Pelicans offense and overall makes Zion a more efficient and a more well-rounded, less predictable player. This same trend is also seen with Zion being used as a pick and roll ball handler. Rather than how most power forwards are used as a screener who then roll to the hoop, this season, especially towards the end of the season, Zion Williamson has been getting more attempts to handle the ball in the pick and roll. With this, he's been in the 80th percentile of all players when it comes to pick and roll ball handling, making him one of the best ball handlers scoring off the pick and roll in the league. If you go around him on a pick and roll and he's able to get even just half of a step on you, Zion has enough power and is strong enough to where he's still going to beat you to the hoop, and if you somehow slide in his way, he's going right through you too. Another reason why I think we could see an improvement from Zion this year is hopefully we can see some better spacing from the Pelicans. The Pelicans were absolutely garbage last year when it came to shooting the 3 ball, in the bottom 5 of both 3-pointers made, 3-pointers attempted, and 3-point percentage. Now the Pelicans did trade Steven Adams for Jonas Valanciunas. Valanciunas isn't the best 3-point shooter in the world, but he's definitely going to do a much better job spacing out the floor than Steven Adams ever would. So I'm hoping this season we can see some better offense from the Pelicans where we're able to get more shots and more chances for Zion to play make, and more chances really just to space out the floor and let him attack the middle. So if like the end of last season where his playmaking has improved, where his pick and roll ball handling has improved, and just his ability to find the open man without increasing his turnovers, I think if we can see this continue next season, Zion could probably bump himself up to about 5.5 assists per game. If he's averaging 27, 7, and 5.5 assists per game, that is a near MVP caliber player. And finally, the last aspect of Zion's game to touch on is his defense. Zion is by no means an amazing defender. You can find many clips of him online where he's failed to rotate, missing simple things, not being able to get a pass that eventually sacrifices the bucket for his team. But on the other hand, we all know the potential that he has. Being the freak athlete, being super strong, and having a crazy vertical, Zion has a ton of potential of being a shot blocker and a guy that's just difficult to get by or difficult to score on down low. Given that he is only 20 years old, we can still write him off given that he is still pretty young for the NBA standards, and I think his force on the offensive side of the ball can make up for some of his defensive shortcomings, but especially if we do want to start calling him an MVP or putting him in that conversation one day, we are going to need to see a bit of step in his defensive game. So that's talking a bit about Zion statistically, and that's talking a bit about what he looks like on the court. So how does he compare to some of the other players, and why do I think that he has a chance to be in the top 20? First, let's talk about Zion versus Karl Anthony Towns. Zion is arguably the better scorer. He is more efficient, albeit Karl Anthony Towns is more well-rounded. Cat is arguably a better rebounder and probably a better playmaker, at least based on their position, although I do think Zion can catch up to him a little bit. Defensively, they are both pretty even as none of them are very special defenders. Cat, ever since he's entered into the league, just hasn't been that good of a defender. Zion, I still think has a potential to be a better defender than him, but at the moment, we just haven't seen too much from Zion at the moment. Our next player is Jason Tatum versus Zion Williamson. This is something that I think is actually much more interesting and even a closer comparison as we look into it a little deeper. Both of these guys are roughly averaging 27 points, 7 rebounds, and 4 assists. Let me say this again. Zion Williamson and Jason Tatum have the exact same box score, with Zion being a much more efficient scorer. Of course, I'm not saying that Zion is outright a better player than Jason Tatum, especially with Tatum being a better playmaker and defender, but the fact that their scoring splits and their overall box score is so close to each other shows that these two guys are a lot closer than what you may initially think of them. How about guys who kind of sit in that mid-tier range like Paul George or Jimmy Butler? I'm definitely giving Butler and George the edge when it comes to their ability to play defense and just kind of be an overall leader, but when it comes to pure scoring, being a pure force on the offensive end, have to give that one to Zion right away. And while it's definitely easy to slander Paul George, Zion also just has some pretty great stats compared to Paul George. Once again, I'm not saying that Zion is better or is not better than Paul George, but if you look at their box scores, if you look at the magnitude that they each cause on offense and just how good that they've been last season and over the past few seasons, I think Zion makes a pretty good case for being at least on the same tier as Paul George and Jimmy Butler. Zion definitely deserves to be right up there, as the impact he has on the game and his individual skill set is just as good as any of those guys that I have just mentioned. But if you look at his growth, if you look at his impact, if you look at the box score, and finally if you watch the film, the dominance that Zion Williamson is showing at a young age is similar to that than a young LeBron or a young Shaquille O'Neal. For all these reasons that I have mentioned and above, this is why Zion Williamson is somehow one of the most underhyped, yet still one of the best players in the NBA who deserves to be in that top 20 conversation.